Christmas is coming, and they're coming too, bringing some gifts and some baggage for you. 1 day, 2 day, 3 days or more. How do we survive those we adore? Your boss, whose idea of a holiday gift is making you work a long double shift. Your date for mom's dinner, who still lives at home and is not well acquainted with hard work or a comb. Perhaps it's your spouse who's on your last nerve, and you'd like to give them just what they deserve. Re-gifting that sweater which you know is too small, or coal in the stocking, or maybe nothing at all. Whomever the problem, whatever the reason, we all want to care for others this season. Yet friends and family, much loved though they be, can create much drama and much misery. What's to be done with all the confusion? Might we suggest an unsettling solution?
I'm sure that little poem doesn't reflect your reality in any way, shape, or form, like it never reflects mine. But it's true, isn't it, that Christmas brings with it the need for something that will help us with our relationships. That something, a thing that we've been exploring since last week, and to be fair, over the last few months here at Burnett Church, is grace. Grace is that thing that I said last Sunday makes it difficult for me to understand why people wouldn't want the story of Jesus to be real. Now, what I don't mean by that is that I don't understand why people don't believe in Jesus. That's a completely different thing. There's another set of circumstances. What I'm saying is that, if it's true that there is an option for us to be related to God in a way that we could never deserve, we could never earn, but is given to us freely anyway. That we have an example set for us of what it looks like to accept people exactly where they are and to base our whole world and life around that idea. Why would we not want that to be true? Because I think grace is that thing that we crave most when we're guilty, right? There is nothing you want more in the moment that you got caught than for somebody to go, but it's okay. It's okay to offer grace to you, something you don't deserve, something you can't earn, but they offer it to you anyway, right? I think the problem is it's also the thing that we want to hold over people's heads the most when they do something offensive to us. It's the thing that we end up withholding because being in power over somebody else actually feels kind of nice, right? Grace is that thing that when applied correctly, though, can solve just about anything, right? And the thing about it is that you can't experience it outside the context of relationship, and by its very nature, it requires an imbalance. In order for somebody to offer grace, the other person has to need it, which is where Jesus enters in, right? Jesus enters in the place that we know we could never attain what God is, that we could never be on his level, but he comes to us and offers grace to us. And we could not have experienced that grace. We could not have known what it looked like without the presence of Jesus. Which is why when John tells his story of the beginning of the story of Jesus, he says this, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. I mentioned last week the word, what does that mean? Well, it means a lot of different things. It's a pretty complex idea, but one of the things that it means is the explanation of who God is came to us. The Word became flesh. You want to know what God is like? Get to know Jesus. That's what we believe. That's what we're taught. That's what the people who experienced Jesus and wrote the New Testament told us about him, that he is everything you need to know about God. If you have questions about who God is, you have to come back to the example of Jesus. And everything you believe about God has to fit within the person and understanding that we've been given about Jesus. And John, who was there with Jesus, says this. He said, we've seen God's glory and the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father full of grace and truth. And we looked at last week, Jesus is all grace and all truth all the time. But that grace is often unsettling to us, right? John wasn't the only one who experienced it. He's not the only one who wrote it down. You can read for yourself in the book of Luke, chapter 19. We're told this story. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. In other words, he had no plans to stay in Jericho. But there was a man there named Zacchaeus. If you grew up in church, you probably know a cute little song about Zacchaeus, the wee little man. Right? Zacchaeus, he was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was. But because he was a wee little man, maybe Irish, we're not told exactly, a wee little man, because he was short. That's the only people I know that say we on a regular basis, okay? Sorry. If you're Irish, I apologize. My email address is tim@burnettchurch.com. He looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. When I was a kid and we would sing that song, I always heard that as we were taught to shout it at Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, you come down. Like Jesus was scolding him or something. I'm not sure that was actually totally accurate. Zacchaeus, come down here immediately. And the crowd probably thought to themselves, the people looking on, here's the tax collector, right? He's one of the evil people in the Bible. Every time you hear tax collector, you should think to yourself something that you think when you hear the word Pharisee in the Bible. Totally different, but people that people didn't like and people that weren't, presented in a good light. So here's Zacchaeus, the tax collector. And the crowd looking on as Jesus said, Zacchaeus, come here. Oh man, he's going to get it. He's going to get it. We're going to get to watch this thief get reamed out by Jesus. But Jesus does that thing he does and says, I must stay at your house today. The disciples probably were just like, we weren't even planning to come here, Jesus. Can we just keep going? Why do you always need to have us have lunch with all the people that nobody likes? All the people, we're not told what the disciples thought, but all the people watching, it says they began to mutter. He has gone to be the guest of a sinner. Part of that muttering, why does Jesus keep doing this? I got here early. I brought my righteousness. I brought my Jesus sign. I prepared. I printed T-shirts, and I don't even get to shake Jesus' hand, right? But he goes to Zacchaeus' house for dinner? Zacchaeus did all the wrong things, I did all the right things, and Zacchaeus gets the reward, right? It's unsettling to them because they don't understand what Jesus is trying to do, right? We talked about this a few weeks ago, but this idea of the kingdom of God, they don't understand the nature of the kingdom of God. And so Jesus tries to explain it to them, right? This version is actually in Matthew, so we're jumping around a little bit. Here's what Jesus says about the kingdom to the people who are muttering about Zacchaeus. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. So the practice of the day was that all the people who didn't have work would go to the center of town and wait. And the landowners would come and they would hire their day workers, right? And they would take them back and hey, if you come work for me for today, I'll give you X number of dollars, or denarius is what it's called in the Bible, okay? But it's just their currency, right? Well, I'll agree to pay you a certain amount. You'll come and do some work for me. Okay, great. So this is the scene that Jesus is setting up. The day workers are all milling about. It's early in the morning. The landowner comes and he agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. This is very early, probably 6:30 in the morning, right? The first people there, the go-getters, the ones who are ready, the ones who are looking for work, want a job, right? The landowner, though, knows that it's not just the keeners who need work, so about 9 o'clock in the morning, he goes out again, okay? And he sees others standing in the marketplace doing nothing, and he told them, "You go also and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. Have you ever heard this story before, by the way? Do you know what's coming? Because what's coming is pretty unsettling if you really think about it, right? This is not how you build a following, right? But this is how you build an upside-down kingdom. He went out again at about noon, and then at about 3 in the afternoon, and he did the same thing. "Hey, guys, go and work in my field. I'll pay you what's fair." Right? About 5 in the afternoon he goes, and he still finds, like, how are these people? You assume that, like, it's not people who are like, "No, that's cool, I don't want to go work in your field." I mean, maybe the denarius wasn't enough for them, so they didn't want to go, right? But probably what we should understand is these are the people who, like, slept in. You know, like they weren't energetic enough to get up and want to go do the job. 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Why have you been standing around all day doing nothing? "Well, nobody hired us," they said. Yeah, which I don't know if that's true or not. He said to them, "Okay, look, go, there's still some daylight left. Go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call in everyone. The sun's going down. It's time for us to pack up for the day. Pay them their wages, and I want you to start with the guys I hired last, okay? And then go on to the first." And this is where the twist comes in, right? This is where the value system of God is unsettling to some, but really hopeful to others. And honestly, I put myself in the category of the people who this should be unsettling to, right? Like, I kind of feel like, you know, my life story isn't very exciting. I grew up in church. You know, I would be one of the guys who was, like, out early. I came to Jesus really early, got involved in my church, behaved myself for the most part, although if you ask my mom, she would say differently, but she's wrong. I did my part, you know, and that's kind of been the story of my life. So when I read this, I'm a little bit unsettled. I think we should let ourselves be unsettled by some of these stories. The workers who were hired at about 5 in the afternoon came, and they each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. You ever had that happen? You ever had, like, you know, "Oh, I thought I was going to get this much," and you start telling yourself in your head that you're going to get more? You're going to get paid more than you deserve. You're going to get more from grandma or grandpa than you deserve, right? "Oh, if the young ones got that much, how much are the older ones going to get?" Right? That's what we think. That's what would be fair to us. But the scriptures say each person got the same amount. Everybody got a denarius. And when they received it, those who had been there first, they did what? They mumbled and grumbled, like those people watching Jesus invite Zacchaeus down from the tree so they can have supper together, right? Those who were hired last worked only 1 hour, they said, and you have made them equal to us. Clearly, they aren't equal to us in our eyes, not by our standards. We gave you more time and more energy. We invested more of ourselves in your work. The landowner answered, "Am I not being fair to you, friend? Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay. Go home." Jesus then clarifies the life that we've all been invited into. If I want to give to the one who is hired last, the same as I gave to you, what business is that of yours? Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money. At this moment, we should stop and remember, Jesus is saying this isn't about what you want. Right? And they probably thought, but you didn't give us what was fair. We earned that money right after you gave us a job to do. Jesus calls them out. I have the right to do what I want with my own money. He puts a spotlight squarely on our resistance to grace. And he ends with this remarkable statement. Or, this is the kind of statement you don't want to stand in the mirror before asking and answering. Are you resentful because I am so generous? I mean, that's probably a little bit offensive to the people looking on, isn't it? Like, what kind of person resents generosity? I think part of what we're supposed to take away from this is that all of us sometimes resent generosity, right? We see it the way that those laborers saw it. And Jesus invites us to see it differently. Our sense of fairness is completely different to the kingdom's sense of fairness. The kingdom of God is characterized by unsettling generosity. And the question before all of us, the question that we need to examine for ourselves is, will we participate in a system where the undeserving get what they don't deserve? And in fact, the undeserving get more than they deserve, right? Where prodigal sons and prodigal daughters, husbands and wives all say, yeah, I'm in for that. And those of us who have not lived a prodigal life are to accept and welcome and celebrate and throw the party. You remember that story, right? We looked at it a few weeks ago, right? The father runs out to his lost son, celebrates. We talked about how much the father put his reputation on the line to do that. And we're told about this, the other son, the son who couldn't come out and celebrate, whose jealousy creates a system and a space where he just can't get excited for his brother who's coming home. And the warning is, hey, be aware. Be aware of how we are prone to feeling and behaving. That oftentimes we miss out on what God is doing because we expect it to be fair by our standards. Right? Our standard of fairness is created by our comparisons. Right? That's how we decide what is fair. We look at two different scenarios and goes, oh, do those, work out well? Like, for instance, yesterday or the day before, my wife and I, around this time of year, we always grab all the Christmas presents that are hiding in the closet, and we put them out on the bed. And we make piles for the children. Why do you do that, Debbie? Because it might not be fair, right? The worst thing in the universe will be to get to Christmas Day and have a obvious disparity between two of the children that you tell them all year long you love them just the same. Unless it's Christmas Day and your favorite got a pile of presents this high, and somehow, I know you're not supposed to have favorites, but you do. Okay, you're a saint. Whoever said no is a saint. Good for you. Yep. I think most parents have a favorite. Consciously or subconsciously, we have a favorite. Anyway, even if it's not for your favorite, even if it's just like, hey, I was a little crazy on Amazon one day and I bought, gifts, and this guy's got this pile and the other two have got this pile. That's exactly what it was like the other day when we were like, whoa, we're like a couple $100 behind on the other two. And this one's going to we've got to figure this out. And we knew that it was unfair. How? Because we compared the piles, right? They were all there for everybody to see. We did the mental math and we were like, we better go back to the mall and get some other things for the other kids. Otherwise, we're going to be in big trouble. That's how we determine what's fair. But that isn't how grace determines what's fair. Grace doesn't compare because it's married to the truth, right? We talked about that a whole bunch. Grace and truth all the time. Jesus is both. I'm not afraid to call a sin or a sinner a sinner, and I'm not afraid to invite them to dinner, right? This is how Jesus went about his life, that he was willing to say, yeah, okay, in spite of all this stuff, I still want to be your friend. I still want to invite you to have a life with me. I still want us to be in relationship. I still want us to be together. So even though it's married to the truth, this is the good news, because the truth has a way of leveling the field, right? Paul said it this way in the book of Romans, that everyone has sinned and falls short of God's glory. So there is one line, and there is one being in the entire universe above the line. It's God, and all the rest of us are equalized underneath, right? All the rest of us are not him, right? We are not Jesus. And so because of that, grace, even though it appears to be unfair, is actually a better version of justice and fairness for the universe. Jesus' solution offers, in other words, the fairest system imaginable. And we call that system the kingdom of heaven. And everyone is invited. Everyone is invited to participate in it on equal terms. There's only one door, one gate, one shepherd for everyone. The know-betters, the did-betters, the didn't know any betters, doesn't matter. People with a past, people with baggage, people with regrets, people with no regrets. It's all the same door. Jesus is grace and truth personified. Everything you need to know about God, who is not afraid to, in our sin, still invite us to be a friend. We enter that door. It's really simple. We enter that door when we put our faith in Jesus, right? When we trust him as our Savior, we trust that what he did made us right with God. And ultimately, I was here yesterday. There were a number of you here yesterday. We were celebrating a life with friends of ours from our church, offering our peace and mourning with them. And they asked me to share the gospel with the people who were here. And I said, life will often have us asking if things are fair, right? In the context of tragic loss, it looks like, is God good? Can he be good under the circumstances? Why is suffering a part of the world that we live in? I think those are fair questions. I think the scriptures ask us to ask God why things aren't more fair, right? The first people that God brought for himself were named after a man who was named because he wrestled with God, right? Israel, that's what that means, right? One who wrestles with God. So God is not afraid or actually discouraged by your questions about the fairness of the universe. He invites you to ask them. But I said to those people yesterday, there is a more important question. If you're going to ask those questions, you have to ask this other question as well. You have to ask the question, who is Jesus of Nazareth? Everything that's written in the scriptures, everything that we know about God that's taught to us in the Bible has to come under our answer to that question. If you don't answer that question, if you haven't come to a place where you're like, I think that the story we're told about Jesus Christ, the story that we're here to celebrate, the story that we bust all the decorations out, that God came to earth for us. And he came and wrapped himself in flesh, laid in a manger, lived a life, grew, did a job, had a ministry, was put to death because of his views and teachings about God. And that death didn't result in his body staying in a tomb, but came out. And he lived again. And so what he said several weeks before his death, I am resurrection and life. I have the power to determine resurrection and life. And then he proved it. All of that made possible because Jesus came. And that's the question that we have to answer. What do we make of that story? Is it true? There are hundreds of people. Some of them wrote it down for us in the Bible. That's what we read when we read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The book of Acts, it's a person who says, I was there, this is what I saw. And they record, and it's confirmed in other extra biblical sources, hundreds of people claim to have seen Jesus after he rose from the dead. So if that's true, now what do I make of all those other questions? Now what do I make of all the wrestling that I go through? If we don't answer that question first, it's really difficult to answer the other questions. They're worth wrestling with, they're worth asking, but I think they're ultimately worth asking because they will lead you to ask the one most important question: who is Jesus of Nazareth? Is it possible that he is the God we looked for? Is it possible that he came to give us peace and joy, to teach us what love looks like? And then ask the other questions in the context of this man who John describes, John who was there, John who we talked about last week, describes as love. If that's true, now what do I make of all the other things? That's the question that Christmas is continually calling us back to ask. It's why it's worth coming back to this scene, to this story, to this period in time every year and going, right, lots of things have happened in 2025. Lots of things have been going on in my life. Let's not forget what the most important question is. Life's defining question. What do I make of Jesus of Nazareth? Would you bow with me and pray